the Arctic will be found in the development of sustainable farming and food security. I believe that learning traditional ecological knowledges from indigenous communities is essential.
And showcasing all of the extremely nice produce that we have in Northern Norway.
The youth are the present and the future. We need to make it more attractive for young people to choose to live in the Arctic. We must dare to bet on the youth, because without the youth, there is no future.
I envision the Arctic to be a future green energy hub and competence area that can attract youth from all over the world. One of the most interesting places to live and work in, both now and in the future.
Hello and welcome back to our second big picture session of the day. And as we know, one of the biggest societal challenges facing the Pan-Arctic region is out-migration, especially of young people. We are really witnessing a demographic pattern in the Arctic, where some population centres are growing, but others are emptying. And often members of smaller communities are moving to regional hubs where there may be the infrastructure available, but there may not be. What are the solutions to all of this? And that is the key aspect to this big picture session today, isn't it? It's the solutions that we want to focus on.
Yeah, I think we're all aware of the challenges. It's not the first conference on Arctic matters. It's not the first time we meet here in Tromsø to discuss this. So I think we know the challenges. We know we need young people moving to the north. We know that it's not only about their jobs, but also jobs for their partners. It's about future jobs. We don't stay in one job forever anymore. It's about affordable housing, it's about infrastructure, it's about cultural events, it's about basically everything. So that's why we're here. We're not going and leaving until we have found the solution. So coffee is outside afterwards. And
Andreas will drag you into Break TV as well.
As well afterwards. But
yes.
You don't want to listen to me now. I think you have a full house here.
We certainly do, but
Yeah.
thank you very much for your input. You'll be coming back a little bit later. But yes, I mean, discussions on at the international level and national level can really give the impression that protecting the Arctic and actually forbidding all development is really the best way forward to taking care of the region and nature. But, there are alternatives to consider, as we've been hearing already here at Arctic Frontiers, and by focusing on sustainable development, net positive impacts may help reverse current demographic patterns. Now, we're going to watch this short film by Rand now, which is really setting out the lay of the land, but also looking at what crucial developments are really needed to support populations in the Arctic.
My name is Scott Stevenson, and I am a scientist at RAND, a nonprofit policy research institution. My sincere thanks to Arctic Frontiers for the opportunity to present our research at this important conference. This year's Arctic Frontiers theme, Moving North, centers on unpacking the factors that promote growing and maintaining communities in the Arctic. To interrogate this theme, as Arctic researchers, it's important to capture a variety of perspectives, given the geographic and cultural diversity across the Arctic. For the past 2 years, my colleagues at RAND, along with our 8 partner institutions across the US and in Norway, have been exploring novel ways to collect, map, and visualize data that can help us understand where factors that could enable Arctic communities to grow and thrive exist currently, and where they could emerge in the future. Our project combines insights and approaches from the natural and social sciences to explore how converging geophysical and socioeconomic pressures will shape Arctic development between now and 2050. As a starting point, we invited Arctic experts and community members to participate in an online Delphi survey to share their insights about the future of development in the Arctic. We asked participants to rate the plausibility of a variety of possible socioeconomic and political outcomes, such as expansion of resource extraction, a rise in ecotourism, and changes in levels of cooperation over local development issues. Responses from this survey showed that many factors that promote well-being at lower latitudes, such as access to jobs, food and water, and services such as education and healthcare, are also critical to building and sustaining thriving communities in the Arctic. But more interesting was the widespread agreement among participants about the activities that would enable such development to occur. In particular, government and industry investment in local capacity and empowerment of communities to make decisions about their own future were revealed as key determinants of successful communities, especially in the Arctic, where local agency is understood to be essential to sustainable development. From these results, we have begun to identify places where a confluence of such enabling factors could serve as loci for potential future development. Our colleague, Ana Rivera, developed an approach for mapping clusters of factors that promote a particular outcome. For example, growing industry in the Arctic will depend on robust health and transportation infrastructure to ensure the well-being of a skilled workforce and promote mobility within and between communities. Locations with existing high concentrations of health and transportation services are better positioned to maintain their existing workforce, attract new workers from outside the region, and invest in new human capital. Our preliminary results reveal that these populated places, concentrated primarily in Alaska and the Barents region, have high concentrations of both of these types of infrastructure. From this research, we might ask further questions about the role of population and economic growth in Arctic communities, such as, is a growing community a thriving community? What factors enable economic growth while also improving community well-being? What does thriving mean for different communities? How can data help reveal these answers? And what processes support Arctic change in an inclusive way? We hope that these questions will serve as fertile ground for the panel discussion to follow.
So some really interesting questions there, and I'm really delighted that I'm going to welcome an esteemed panel up onto the stage. And first of all, I'm really pleased to welcome Norway's Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre. Also, please welcome Dr. Abby Tingstedt from RAND Corporation. She's the co-director of the Climate Resilience Centre. Sarah Olsvig, Inuit Circumpolar Council Chair, Greenland. And Tom Einar Jensen, who's the CEO of Freyr Battery. Welcome. Thanks, Tom. Lovely to have you. Just take a seat here. So, Prime Minister, really great to have you here on the panel. And I think given that geopolitics is looming so large, let's talk about why population in the far north is so essential for security reasons. What's your take on that? And can you kind of explain just why that is?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I came here as foreign minister from 2005 till 2012, quite frequently. Then we discussed, of course, security, and we discussed all the opportunities of expanding cooperation in the Arctic, in the Barents region, people to people, education, energy, a lot of projects. Now I'm invited to come and discuss about population patterns, how we maintain and increase a population here in the north. And we do it from a security perspective. And I believe that is absolutely key. And it reminds me, when I did my military service back in 1979 to 81, we were told back then, it was during the Cold War, that it was in the national interest of Norway that people were living in Finnmark. That there were people, not an empty space between Norway and the border to the Soviet Union. Now, I think we have to frame that question a bit differently, but with the same security policy dimension. You know, the people moving across the Norwegian-Russian border has been a kind of a temperature of relations. Back in 1990, there were about 5,000 people crossing that border during a year. In 2010, I think we went beyond 300,000. And back then, the vision we had, not the plan for the next few years, but the vision was that we were developing a more normal neighboring relationship. Now I think we are down at a few, tens of thousands. last year. So this has been going like this. Now, the core of this in Norway has to be that we should secure, through thriving business, through opportunities for value creation, because it has to begin there, and then active and strategic political decisions, secure population patterns in the north. That young people who are born here can take their high-level education, can take their professional training and stay, and that people coming from other parts of Norway, other parts of Europe, other parts of the world would find it attractive to move in. Tom will talk afterwards about battery value chain, which is now opening up as an opportunity. We need skills from other parts of the world to develop these new green skills. So we have to approach with some known political measures and some new innovative political measures to attract people to the north of Norway. And I do that as Prime Minister from a position of opportunity, because there are great opportunities here in the north, and we have to turn the mentality to see that these opportunities are really there for us to grasp. But it will require some bold political decisions, down to the very micro level, what really makes a family tick, what is important for a family to stay, to the more broader strategic infrastructure education patterns. The University of Tromsø came in the late 1960s, and there was a lot of opposition to building that university, because people said, if you divert university capacity from the capital, you weaken universities. That was not true. So, it just signals that investing in that capacity is a long-term investment that yields really great returns.
So you talk about academia there, but where do you really see the future for industry in the north, and what is needed in terms of infrastructure to attract that? Because at the moment there is a real feeling as though there's lots of promises, but not enough has been delivered.
Well, I've been now for a couple of days up here in the north. I was in Hammerfest yesterday, and almost everywhere I go, almost every question I'm being posed, the answer is the same. We need more electricity, we need more grid, and we need more energy efficiency. Those three. So what is the question? This is the answer almost to all questions. And this is a national challenge, because we need renewable energy to support the reduction of climate emissions. That has to be done. And it is in the source of these green renewable energy resources where we have abundant potential that we can support new green industries. But this will not come just like this. It is complex. It will require investment. It will require cooperation. It will require adjustment to local communities who may be affected by it. But that is really where I see the main challenge now. There are lot of low-hanging fruits, but we need really to accelerate and speed up that transition.
So let me bring in Tom now, because you are part of this energy revolution with the idea for this battery gigafactory. Tell me a little bit more about this, but what do you need on the ground to try and ensure you've got the employees to actually make operations run smoothly? What kind of infrastructure do you need? What kind of housing opportunities are vital, for example? Because it's all right to try and, we see perhaps that energy needs are there, but what's needed to support that?
Well, so first of all, thank you for inviting us here, and it's a pleasure to listen to the Prime Minister talk about the challenges that Norway has and the opportunities that lies therein. I think also the Arctic is an excellent sort of area to sort of solve these challenges, in particular in Norway, because Norway has abundant, at least still presently, abundant surplus energy in this region, and most of it is renewable, if not all of it, and most of it is still reasonably low cost. So we actually decided to locate almost at the Arctic Circle to build Giga Arctic, which is kind of a fitting name if you think about it. A gigafactory producing the cleanest battery solutions on the planet. How do you attract people to come and join something like this? Well, you just market what Norway has to offer, what the Arctic has to offer. You do what is natural to do. You showcase that there is a thriving business that can really sort of compete in the international scene. That is about scale. And how can Norway argue how to get to scale? that is just showcasing what Norway has done in energy-intensive and process-intensive industries for more than a century. So I just think what we need to do to sort of move into the battery age, if you like, biased as I am, being a battery guy, I think we just need to showcase that Norway has done this before. We've done this for more than 100 years. We have enabled businesses to get to scale, which is critically important to be profitable. And being profitable attracts private capital. And when you attract private capital, you can build things at scale. So we have a government in Norway who understands this and who is, putting the pieces together to ensure that this happens. And we are very confident about our ability to be able to deliver on that. And one thing I'd like to say is, this is not something that is going to happen in the future. This is something that is happening now. In our Giga Arctic development and in our current endeavors in Mo i Rana, we already have 15 different nationalities working there. I'd like to bring one example to the fore. We have a Brazilian couple, battery engineers, both of them, who had hundreds of different offers around the world, and they came here to Mo i Rana, the Arctic Circle, to use their competence to be part of something that we have been able to argue to them. So what we say is that this is the place to be. We will build sustainable industrial development at scale. It's a collaborative approach between government and industry, and we're going to do a lot of it.
So you haven't faced difficulties in recruitment?
Of course we face difficulties every day, as the government faces difficulties every day. It's not about facing difficulties, it's how you face them that is really the question.
So what are you doing then? What are you doing to attract the best talent to come here? I mean, obviously you've had the win with the Brazilian couple, but given that you still have those difficulties, what strategies are you taking?
Well, again, I think it boils down to demonstrating that we can be a thriving business, which is a function of scale. So to be able to say that Giga Arctic, in the name Giga, is scale. And how do you enable that? Well, you find the right location, you find the ability to use low-cost green electricity, you showcase the bounties of the Arctic region, which is nature, which is northern lights, which is, all the things that we all sort of love to see when we come here. But at the end of the day, it's about talking to individual talent that really want to make a difference in the world. And this is really what I think the young generation is looking for. How can I be part of that energy transition that we're all sort of striving for? And I think Norway has an excellent opportunity in that, but also collaboration across the entire Arctic Circle will enable that to happen. Here in the Arctic is where we see the impacts of climate change first. The most dramatic impacts of climate change are actually happening here. So therefore, fixing it here and seeing it here is two sides of the same coin.
Okay, well, let me bring in Abby Tinstad now. And Abby, I just want to find out from you if you think there is a specific recipe to stop out-migration. I mean, many questions were raised in that video. What is needed to create a thriving community and to encourage people to stay and not leave, or actually to arrive?
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. And first, I'll note that I still think it is an open question for debate whether a thriving community needs to be growing. So perhaps we can continue discussing that as well. But I do think that in the research, we have seen it borne out that there are common themes of need for access to livelihoods, which may also include traditional livelihoods, need, of course, for food and water security, among other things. Access to mobility, education, all these kinds of elements. And I appreciate where this conversation is going in terms of opportunities, in terms of finding solutions. But one thing that I wanted to refocus on a little bit is this idea of enhancing local capacity, something that we discussed yesterday in the big picture session as well. And the reason I say that is because local communities are such an important part of the conversation. In the United States, we have a political phrase of lore that all politics is local. I also believe that in many ways, all solutions are also local, or at least some of the most important elements of them can be local. And so I think in addition to these broad ingredients and opportunities that we're trying to take advantage of across the Arctic to stop out migration, to invite others to move north. In fact, we need to consider what is the capacity of local communities to participate in that conversation, to offer their own insights and data, if you will, to help build the solutions. And Susanna, I realize that you are asking the questions here, but if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Prime Minister, if you're able to share anything about your government's plans for being able to include local communities and gather the insights and information from them as you proceed forward, I'd be very grateful.
Well, thank you. I think, from the outset, we have a very close and intimate dialogue between local communities and government, between municipalities and government, on a very regular basis. I mean, just to take one example, every municipality, every 350, from the smallest to the biggest, are now receiving refugees from Ukraine. All of them. And it may happen also at the same scale in 2023 as this terrible war goes on. So how do you then adapt in a local community? How do you support housing? How do you facilitate procedures so that this can happen in a meaningful way? Just as an example. The other one is, of course, that we have to be evaluating measures to see if they work. We have to do that in a combination with academia, with research, but also on-the-ground experience. Yesterday I was up in Hammerfest and I met a couple of parents who will, from the 1st of August, experience free kindergarten in what we call the action zone, which is Finnmark and part of Troms, the northernmost part of Norway. So this is a decision we have taken in government that from 1st of August and onwards there will be free kindergarten. That will be a real economic measure to the economy of a family. So will that measure in itself change patterns? Probably not. But combined with, reducing the debt burden of students, combined with other measures where we have to be very close to the local communities to see what works, because there are local communities where there may be not that many with university degrees and those loans, so that is maybe not relevant for them. Then there is another dimension which in this very diverse country as is Norway is the housing issue. Because dealing with housing in Oslo, in Tromsø, or in a local community in Finnmark is a very different thing. But housing is key anyway. So how do you prepare for the building of affordable housing? So how is all this coming together? And we see from demographic predictions that there are some great challenges ahead for the north of Norway, if trends follow as they are. But trends tend to make surprises with demographic developments, and it may be, as Tom is experiencing, that you can really attract people with qualities of life in the north of Norway from really remote places. That the issue can maybe present itself in very different manners in a few years' time. That actually people from other parts of the world who we didn't think of may say that, this is interesting. These are interesting jobs, this is meaningful for the future, and the welfare and the living condition is really something which compares well at a broader scale.
What about issues such as transportation, though? I mean, the remoteness of certain communities would be seen as a real plus point, obviously, for many people who've lived there for many generations and don't want that to change. But if you're trying to attract new people to the region to fulfill the jobs that Tom is creating, for example, often transport is cited as one of the points that really needs to be improved. What are you going to do there?
Well, I mean, we can never argue our geography, into a highly populated urban center. It will always be sparsely populated. I think one big challenge is that air tickets are extremely expensive. And, I hear that every time I visit, and I see it's a challenge. We have one of our ambitions in our government program is to reduce those airfares and to make wise support schemes to make that work. Then we have a diverse transport pattern here. We have the sea route, which is important, that provides stability to communities along the coast. And then there are some opportunities opening up. We have these, in the international setting, small-scale airports in northern Norway. And they are, 45, 30 minutes apart. And can they be testing ground for new eco-friendly fuel aircraft? And there are even those who say, Widerøe are working on that, that the first electric short-term flights may operate on these routes. So here again, there may be a great opportunity to do something which is really cutting edge, and it will change perspective of how transportation happens. But you are right, transportation is key.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me move on to Sarah Olsvig, because I want to get your point of view when we talk about what is a thriving community. Do you think there is enough regard and inclusion of the indigenous point of view of what is a thriving community, and that often perhaps the points of view aren't taken on board in terms of policy making, and how should that be done?
Many questions in one.
Yes.
Well, first of all, Qujanaq, thank you for inviting me and the Inuit Circumpolar Council here to this important conference. I've been here a few times before, but it was a few years back that I was in Romsa, Tromsø, in Sápmi, here in Norway. So thank you so much for hosting us, to the Sami people and the Norwegian people. I think it's important that we meet and get together and discuss these important issues. And I actually want to just, after listening to the different presentations here, take a minute to remind everyone that for indigenous peoples, today and these years are unprecedented. It's climate change that is directly affecting our livelihoods, our way of transportation across ice. It is the geopolitical situation that we have been through similar times, but it is today a very, very serious situation for us as peoples. Like Sami people, we live across borders of Russia, Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. And we are directly impacted by the geopolitical situation of the world. And I also think that it is important that when we then talk about development of the Arctic, that we remember that we have been through colonial times. We have been through times that have so deeply impacted us as peoples that we today are very aware of what is going on and how will the consequences today be of those actions and policies and development efforts that are done. That doesn't mean that we do not want development in the Arctic, but we want development by, for, and with us, not about us. We've said that many times, I think, indigenous peoples, nothing about us without us, is a saying that has been repeated many times, also by our governments. And I think that is truly, truly key to any policy development about the Arctic. We have seen resource races before. Colonization of Greenland was very much driven by the resource race. First it was the whaling, then it was other resources, the sealskins and blubber and all kinds of things that were used in the south for commodities. So we have been through these waves of race to the north, and it has impacted us in very, very serious ways, in good ways as well. So I think that it is very important that the development that has been driven by indigenous peoples, together with exactly our states, Norway, Denmark, even the government of Greenland, Iceland, Finland, and all of the Nordic states and the US and Canada, where we have joined forces in developing new principles for recognition and implementation of the rights of indigenous peoples, that we then actually also implement them in our own policies. And I think that for Inuit, we are ready to engage, and we are ready to provide our input and guide those who come from the south and want to engage with us in the north.
Do you think what you've put in place is sufficient to stop history repeating itself in this race for resources?
Well, we see time and time again that principles of ethical engagement are broken, or that decision-making processes are not including indigenous peoples in sufficient ways. So this is also a test to our own states on how to implement democratic principles on our own land.
So how do you prevent principles of ethical engagement from being broken, Prime Minister? What steps should be taken? What safeguards should be put in place?
Well, we have rules and procedures and legislation developed over time. We have, for the Sami people, we have the Sami Parliament, which is an important voice to be heard. And basically, I think this phase, I mean, there's history to look after here, but this phase is really about how do we develop renewable energy sources? And I stress renewable, so it means that it's not taking away something. How do we share the revenues in a fair and equitable way through our distribution system? And that has to be done in consultation. And I think we should also approach that with no illusions that there are not interest conflicts along the road, but there are opportunities here. Basically, as you say, there has been also to the benefit of local communities, and that has to be the approach.
Okay, thank you. Let me move to Tom now. We talk about that collaboration, that need for cooperation. What have you done, and what kind of process have you gone through to make sure that the local community is on board? You talk about attracting talent from elsewhere, but what about ensuring that those people already on the ground are supporting and have had a right of say in that development?
Yeah, so a big part of the reason why we are in the Arctic is because of the collaboration we have experienced and the open arm policy that Mo i Rana have sort of granted us, so to speak. So we like to say that Mo i Rana has this industrial DNA. They understand how to do industrial business. They understand the 24/7 shift labor mentality. They've been around for a century. They're basically sort of a mini Norway in many ways in terms of Norway's industrial development. And so that's kind of a good starting point. And then we have, of course, collaborated deeply with Rana Municipality and Rana Utvikling and a number of local entities to create onboarding programs, to have internationalization programs. How do we attract not only skilled workers and internationally experienced battery engineers, but how can we ensure that their wives and their children can be integrated into society? We have ensured, together with Rana Municipality, that we've created the first vocational educational system for battery engineers, for instance, in Mo i Rana. We have created programs to establish local housing to people, and so on and so forth. So we haven't done everything, but I think Mo i Rana understands the need for attracting international talent to unlock the scaling of a new industry, and we're very happy with that. And the final thing I'd like to say on this is, I think the collaboration, as the Prime Minister is talking about, between the municipality and the local politicians and the central government, and ensuring that not only the local incentives and local programs, but that is kind of anchored in a larger national setting. That is also something that seems to work quite well in a Norwegian context. This transparent, no bullshit, pardon my French, society is something that I think is attracting a lot of people from outside.
This feeds into a question we've just got from the audience. Question Monsen says, have you actually asked talent what they want and need to come to Mo i Rana?
Absolutely. So we do surveys.
And how do you do that yet?
I mean, you through any sort of social media and any sort of channel you can, and on fairs and wherever you are to attract people. You ask them for what are you looking for, what is important for you, how can we sort of support your professional and personal development. I mean, again, as I said earlier on, this is all about providing a credible basis for a business that can thrive. And I just have to stress that that is about, in our business, it's about scale. And how can you document and argue that we can build something at scale? And Norway has a number of parameters present to enable battery business at scale. And as long as we are able to argue that and support that, I don't think there is any issue in getting people to come to the Arctic to live and thrive and sort of develop that industry.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Let me bring in Abby. I know you wanted to make a point.
Yes, just quickly, I think if we've learned something from the past couple of decades of increasing collaboration and conversation here in the Arctic, is that it takes a lot of work to build momentum and to seize these opportunities, to make important changes happen, and to keep important things that don't need to change the same, and to protect them, if you will. And so one thing I want to just put in the conversation here is that, as I said, building momentum takes a lot of work, and a lot of the different assets that you need to support a thriving community, they just don't come out of thin air, and I don't think anyone here is saying that, but if I can expand the purview of the discussion to other parts of the Arctic, which I think we'll hear about shortly, if we look at the state of Alaska and northern Alaskan communities, there are some communities that just do not have reliable utilities, things that many of us may just take for granted, and yet to establish that utility infrastructure in such a harsh environment with such big gaps and distances and other challenges, it takes effort and building up of financing and other things year after year after year. And so I think we should bring into this discussion perhaps a little bit more, how do we maintain momentum for our initiatives that move beyond a particular phase of business or move beyond a particular government? So I think those are
thanks,
important.
Abby. Let me bring in Stella Osvig. Is that an experience that you've gone through? Lack of infrastructure, various parts of Greenland holding back perhaps the opportunities, and how are you facing that?
Well, it is a big challenge, the infrastructure in the Arctic and across Inuit Nunat and also in Greenland. And from the Inuit Circumpolar Council, is one of our priority areas is to focus on and have our states and governments and policymakers act on the infrastructure deficit, as we call it. It is related to our access to healthcare. It is related to our access to education, and here we should also focus not just on education, but quality education that is also appropriate for our peoples and cultures. It is our access to jobs, as was also mentioned, and it's fundamentally an issue that is down-to-earth, on-the-ground challenges. For example, even have clean and healthy sanitary installations across Inuit Nunat. We have had situations in Canada where Inuit communities had to bring in bottled water. We are in the Arctic, we have some of the cleanest water in the world, but because of infrastructure deficit, this has been the reality. So I think we have a common huge challenge that is also about willingness to fund, willingness to spend the necessary resources to encourage and support that development. And I think that for many Arctic peoples, this goes hand in hand with the whole notion of how do we develop our communities and our local businesses in a way that is suitable for us. That we are not lectured from the outside on how to develop things, but that we are actually invited into equal partnerships with those who come from the outside and want to do development in our homelands. And I think that is truly key if we are going to have a healthy and good coexistence, which we also want in the Arctic. So I think it's very important also, as the Prime Minister mentioned, the fact that we are so sparsely populated and we live in so remote and in such small communities. And you have to think about across Inuit Nunat, we don't have roads between the towns and settlements. We have to fly or go by a boat. So any development is very expensive. Mm-hmm. So I just want to mention the very important work that is going on the global negotiations on climate under the UNFCCC. Yes, it's so good that we finally have the idea of having a loss and damage fund. But that resource is right now built to flow from north to south. And we have been saying that we have to get rid of the false dichotomy of thinking of the world in developed and developing. Because we have in our own communities also the need to access those funds. And I think that those are the kind of things where we have to partner strategically and make sure that we together find a way forward that will be for the true benefit of Arctic indigenous peoples and everyone in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm. Well, Prime Minister, let me put that point to you. Abby is talking about this need for momentum, and clearly from what Sarah's saying, this momentum is very patchy across the Arctic region. Parts of it where it's clearly, there is the potential for momentum, other parts, it's completely different. How do you make it more even, if that is at all possible? And do you think it is access to global funding that could help move the dial?
I feel a particular responsibility for Norway.
Good.
Yes. And I mentioned here that there's you saw on that map those red spots where there is population now, which is really the center. And I mentioned as an example, back in the years I was in Ottawa to discuss high north issues with Canadian government, and You know, the 60th parallel runs through Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, Bergen, and then around the globe. And the facts ran that there are more people living in the municipality of Tromsø than north of the 60th parallel in Canada. I think that still is right, which really is an example of people living in Tromsø, but not that many people living in the north of that great country, Canada. So, you know, the settings are different, and that is making the Arctic family a fascinating family, because we have very different challenges. The disaster which is happening in Ukraine has ramifications up in the north, because really Norway and Russia as neighbors, Arctic neighbors, with a lot of common issues on our plate. You know, we have the Arctic and the Barents Sea. I spent a lot of time with Foreign Minister Lavrov negotiating delimitation according to the law of the sea, and we did a lot of progress on how we could, you know, move gradually towards something that is now, you know, frozen. And that, I think, is a great strategy. So let's hope that there may be, you know, another future back there. But until then, I think from my perspective, you have to take as your point of departure the local reality, how these population patterns in Norway interrelate, how they work together. And for this government, at least, we see this from a perspective of developing our welfare state, but also now in a security policy dimension. Because having a lively and sound base for industry, for business, small and medium and larger, and welfare measures that really matter to families in a northern perspective, that is on our agenda.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And I'd like to bring you in again, Tom, because we talk about this momentum, and you creating the Gigafactory. The problem is, if you want a career, you might not expect to be, many people don't, working in one company for life, and you want other opportunities. Do you think actually that could hold back your recruitment over the longer term if you're the only place really that they feel as though there is an opportunity? You need it to expand, do you not, to provide that momentum, or are you happy being the sole pioneer?
No, well, so from a company perspective, to have multiple career opportunities for individuals is important. That's why we're very proud and happy to say that we're also building a gigafactory in the United States, and we're happy to build additional gigafactories elsewhere. This is, again, about scale. And I'd just like to sort of bring this back also, and tying it back to talent and where they're looking. This is the largest secular shift in human history that we're in front of. This energy transition that we're in front of is not only about moving from fossil to renewable. It's about ensuring lower cost of energy. It's about ensuring energy security. And it's about ensuring that we can have energy for all in a sustainable way. And just to put this into perspective, we need to triple electricity production on the planet in the next 20-odd years. We need to 20-fold solar and wind installations, and we need to probably 400-fold the way we store energy. Why is that important from an Arctic perspective? Because probably the best wind resource on the planet is in the Arctic. Now, we need to figure out how to do that in collaboration with the indigenous communities. When we put windmills on land, we know that there are issues related to that. When we build industry that capture that energy and turn it into industrial products, we need to be able to talk about it. But I think from a people's perspective, this is the industry to be in. The energy transition is the industry to be in. And I think everything surrounding that, all adjacent academia, education, research and development, and sort of industrial development around it, it's all about that. How do we accelerate that? And that's about people. And I think there's a lot of good people.
Thank you. Yes, let me bring in Abby, because I want to find out what research at RAND is thrown up about what Tom's saying.
Well, I do think that of course, the energy transition is globally an important issue, and it sounds like there's a lot of good opportunities here in Norway as well to capitalize on that and to make it a reality, so to speak. But I think one thing that we and others have found in our research is that just as different parts of the Arctic are very different today, when we think about what the future may look like, why these communities may thrive and in some cases, in many cases perhaps, grow in different ways, it's not due to just one industry. A lot of it has to do with what is there already. So if we have local fishing communities trying to capitalize on that, on their local knowledge, etc. If we have communities that, we hear examples in Canada and in Alaska, for example, partnerships with mining companies. In other instances, we have the building of ecotourism opportunities and things like that. So I think it's quite diverse, and the challenge really is to build that local capacity and partnerships with national governments, of course with indigenous organizations and others, in order to see that those trajectories into the future.
And looking at the future, I just want to alight just a final thought really to put to the panel about the possible trend. We're talking about out-migration, but are we ready for mass migration north as climate change accelerates? The potential that more and more people will seek opportunities in the north. And what is your take on that? And is that a trend that you're already starting to map out, Abby?
Well, I think we see in our social science research that definitely there is a lot of optimism for the potential for that. In fact, looking at decades, maybe moving forward, whereas many parts of the world may be severely challenged with food and water security, there is a future in parts of the north, or maybe all of the north, where there could be even better food and water security if the conditions are set to take care of the people, to take care of the environment. So yes, there's a lot of possibility here.
Let me put that to you, Prime Minister. Do you think Norway is ready for that shift?
Well, I hope that we will. I mean, I think that we already see that migration patterns are heavily influenced by conflict and climate change. That's for sure. And there are no tendency to indicate that either dimension would, go down. So I think that's a tragic thing. Then we touched upon a few minutes ago that I think we, from a Norwegian perspective, should, and this would look different from the city of Oslo to the north of Norway, how we look at population opportunities ahead. And I think, here in the north, we should look with some fresh eyes on migration in large. We've had European migration. We've had colleagues coming from the Baltic states, from Poland. Now we may see a trend maybe being a bit reversed. I heard somebody indicating to me from industry today that they were, casting their eyes on Southern Europe. Would they be attracted to opportunities further north? That kind of development I would favor, because it will be people who would seek opportunities on that basis. But if you really take the dire scenario of dramatic climate change and tipping points, you will have migration patterns of a more chaotic form. And again, having the neighbor we have next door here, Russia, we have to look carefully after our border because migration can be used in many ways.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Do you fear that chaos, Sarah?
Well, it should definitely be a very well thought through and careful development, again, because of what we have already been through in history. I'm from Greenland. Luckily, we are slowly increasing in numbers in the population in Greenland, but there was actually years where we were decreasing in numbers. And there has been some historic issues that are still today affecting our number of people. For example, policies from the state to insert IUDs in women and girls, which happened to, as far as we know now, to half of the women and girls in the end of 60s, beginning of 70s. So the baggage we have in the backpack from colonization is so real on an individual level and on a collective level. So any development, it has to be a careful development, taking into account the lives on the ground, individual and collective lives on the ground, individual and collective rights of the peoples who live in the Arctic. But I think that we are in a good development. More and more open dialogue and debate about our past is being taken both in Greenland and across the Arctic, and hopefully all other nations in the Arctic as well. And I think that has to also happen for us to be in a better place of understanding of each other in the future.
Okay, well, many thanks to you all. It's been a really fascinating panel. That is all we have time for, but I'd like to thank you for your contribution. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Thank you. So if you'd like to just make your way off that side, thank you very much. Thanks, Abby. Thank you. Okay, so we're now going to move on to our next panel. That was a really fascinating debate there, but I would now like to invite our next panelists up to the stage. So please welcome Lisa Murkowski, who's the Senator for Alaska from the US Senate. Also, Angus Robertson, Cabinet Secretary of the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture of Scotland. Please take a seat. Hello, Angus. Welcome. Also, please welcome Sigrun Augustsdottir, who's Director General of the Environment Agency of Iceland. Hello, Sigrun. Yes, do just take a seat. Hi. Hi. Please welcome as well Mia Ahlstrand, Project Leader, Norrbotten North Sweden Green Deal from Sweden. Hi, Mia. Nice to meet you. Hi. You take a seat.
Nice to meet you, Mia.
And also Larry Ibrahim Mohammed, who's the Arctic Frontiers, one of them, the emerging leaders. So great to have you on the panel, Larry. Larry is also a PhD candidate at UIT, the Arctic University. Welcome, Larry.
What a great reception.
So everybody, please do sit down. And let's focus on Alaska, first of all, Lisa. Well, we did hear a little bit from Abby in the last panel about some of the challenges in pockets of Alaska. What do you believe are really the main aims of tackling outmigration? What have been your successes?
Well, I'm glad we're focusing on successes because we tend to focus a lot on the challenges. And it's hard. It's just hard in northern environments. And yet, think about it. The resilience of the northern people, the resilience of the people of the north is legendary. And so I think it is important that as we deal with challenges, the Prime Minister pointed out some of the national security challenges that are in place, but we think about the challenges in the Arctic. It's economic security, that job security. Where are the jobs? Where is the workforce? We think about energy security and the very high cost of energy that makes, in some of our communities, just really, really troubling. And then, of course, the threats that we're seeing all over related to food security. In Alaska particularly, we are seeing real challenges with our fisheries. The fisheries that have sustained Native peoples since time immemorial. So the challenges are real. But there are so many exciting opportunities with the resilience and the innovation and the imagination, I think, that comes. Some of the things that we have seen in Alaska when we look to some pioneering things, what are we doing to get our energy costs down? We are leading the country. We're really playing a very global role when it comes to innovation in the energy sector through microgrids. We have effectively one electric grid that kind of runs right up the center of the state, but you have over 80% of your communities in the state of Alaska that are not connected by road. So you are accessible by road or by ferry, by boat, not unlike what Sarah was talking about with Greenland. And so our energy systems are very isolated, very islanded. And what we have been doing to really demonstrate best practices with a level of innovation, a few wind turbines coupled with some battery storage, you got a little run-of-river project. I'm not saying that it's easy, but we're making it happen. We are pioneering with that.
And how are you doing that? You know, what steps do you take to make that happen, to make that grid system work, to put it in the ground and get it going? I mean,
is it
a political fight? Is it
Yes.
is it the biggest political fight?
It's yes to everything. It takes a lot of grit and determination and just a recognition that the way that it's done outside, because we describe everything outside the state of Alaska as the outside, the lower 48. It's not going to necessarily work that way. So whether it's a water and wastewater system, whether it's energy, microgrids, it's just going to be a little bit different. So allow us the flexibility. We're going to need the resources. We passed just this past year probably the most substantive infrastructure bill that our nation has seen, and it is significant. Already in just 1 year, Alaska has seen just about $3 billion coming to us to support everything from water and wastewater systems to broadband improvements to connecting communities in the very first place, to helping assist with ports and harbors, with ferries, because we don't have the roadways as we might need. So it is investment that is key, and it's going to be critical. And it doesn't come easy. The funding side doesn't come easy.
And the debt ceiling fight is going on right now.
That's another subject for another time. We don't need to go into that here because I don't have the answers on that yet either. But I think what people need to be reminded is that there is a resilience that comes with living in the Arctic and in very rural and remote places like Alaska. But you stick to it because this is where the people live. There's the attraction of the Arctic that keeps us there despite everything else. We're not going anywhere.
Great point to lead me on to Angus Robertson, because the Scots are known for grit and determination as well. And of course, what do you think Arctic regions learn from the experience of Scotland? Clearly not as far north, but remote, rural, island communities. What have you learnt in this process of stopping the migration out of Scotland and away from those remote communities?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for the honour of being here as a non-Arctic person. But for those of you who don't know, Scotland is the most northerly non-Arctic nation in the world. So we are your closest neighbours. And for those of you who know your geography, you might know that the most northern part of Scotland is called Sutherland, because for you it is your southern land. So we are bound by history, we are bound by geography, and we have a shared experience. And we, like a country like Norway, we have serious population challenges. We are overwhelmingly a rural nation, but only a small percentage of our population lives in much of the rural parts of the country. And our population challenge is significant. We're the only nation in the United Kingdom that has a projected population decline. Brexit is a significant contributory factor in that. And so we have to do what we can do. So to your question, what is it that lies in the orbit of government? So what we have tried to do in the Scottish Government is to work right across government as a whole, not see this population challenge as being siloed, something that's only the responsibility of one bit of government. We said this is a responsibility of the whole of government. So I chair a population task force where my colleagues who are responsible for health, education, housing, transport, and that we meet in a structured format to make sure that government policies and plans are oriented so they're heading in the right direction. Point one, so it's a cross-government scale approach. Secondly, is to try and be innovative. To try and think of the interventions. We heard many from the Prime Minister earlier about what is it that Norway has done in the past, is continuing to do, and is doing so very successfully, if I may say so. What is it that we can learn from other nations? And this is where I think fora like this are so important, that we can learn from Alaska or Norway, who knows, maybe from Scotland. And we have some good stories to tell. We have some exciting developments which are good. Again, from the first session, we heard so much about the importance of the energy transition. This is, without doubt, the biggest period of change that we're about to go through. For those of you who are not aware of it, we have gone through our first leasing round in Scotland for renewable offshore floating wind capacity at a scale of 28 gigawatts. It is huge, and it is happening. And what do we all have in common in the north? We're all wet and we're all windy. And that's quite helpful if you're wanting to produce renewable energy. And I think we need to understand the opportunities that that brings to help protect communities. And I was so struck by our friend from Greenland. We shouldn't talk about the regions that we're talking about as if people don't live there already. People live there. We want to make sure that if people want to live there, thrive, yes, go away and study, but come back, have opportunities that they have that. And then you have the question that follows next. Well, what do we need to do to make sure that if people are going to leave, that we can make our more challenged parts of the country or the region attractive? And this is what I'm spending quite a lot of time thinking about. What is it that we actually need to communicate to people from elsewhere? That whether it's Finnmark or whether it's Argyll and Bute in Scotland or whether it's other parts of the Arctic region, what if you're not from there that can encourage you to move there? And I was so taken by the example of building the industry and they will come, because clearly that is what you've done. You have spread the word far and wide, well, far enough to Brazil, clearly, and elsewhere, other places too, and people have said, I like the look of that. Not only is it a good job, but it's a great place to live. And therein lies the other part of the challenge. Yes, what can government do better, local and national, but what is it that we can do to better showcase all of the places that we're from to say, come, live, work? And we've had exactly the same experiences as Norway has had in terms of Ukrainians coming to different parts of the country. We had that previously with Syrian refugees. And we need to be open to having people coming from, yes, the rest of the country, but also from elsewhere to help maintain population, economic vibrancy, and the future that we all want from wherever we come from in the north.
Well, thanks very much, Angus. And this is a really good time when you're talking about this, is to bring in Larry, because Larry, you took up opportunities here in the Arctic. Just tell me, what grabbed your attention? What made you think this is the place for me? This is the land of opportunity.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Actually, when I wanted to come to Tromsø, I knew little about Tromsø. What drew my attention to Tromsø was two things. One, the fact that the university was flexible enough to think that as somebody from Ghana, I didn't have to demonstrate that I could speak English like somebody from UK. So I got an exemption from writing those international standardized tests, which if I wanted to go to UIO in Oslo, I would have taken that exams. And the second part is that I had tuition-free education, so it means I could come to Norway in general and have access to education without paying fees. Unfortunately, this is probably not going to happen to other people like myself who are yearning and wanting to better their lives and acquire higher education, because now Norway intends to introduce tuition fees. And I think that probably this is something that we can come back to later on, because I have so much points to make on that. But I also want to emphasize that the Arctic is a place of opportunity. So that even when I came here and I didn't know so much about the Arctic, I realized one thing about myself that I didn't know before, which is that I love the nature, right? So we need to understand that when young people want to move, there are different things that let them move to different places. We have young adults, as I call it, and we have young professionals, as I try to divide them. You could find some young adults who are bursting with a lot of energy, want more adventure. That's the kind of life they want. And we have young professionals who want a stable life. They want a place that they can thrive, a place that is good welfare system. So we need to balance the two. And
you want a combination of both, really.
I do, actually. That's why I'm still here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you are. I'll come back to you a moment, Larry. And I just want to bring in Sigrun now, because let's talk about, Angus was saying about the fact that because of Tom's factory that we heard about in the first round, he's brought the people to the factory. But what about if people want the opportunities to be brought to them where they live and they don't want to move? They're happy about where they live and they just want that opportunity. I know that you've got an initiative at the Environment Agency where effectively you can work in any part of Iceland where there is a hub. You can tell me more about that in a moment. But what is it about your own personal life that prompted you actually to start this initiative or be involved in it anyway?
Yeah. Well, I'm brought up in a little village of 800 people in the south of Iceland. And as you can imagine, I could go to school there until I was 16. And I had to make a choice where to go. And then I had to make another choice when I was 20. And as you can imagine, the job opportunities for people with a university degree are not so many. So the reason to come back was not there either. So I'm really happy about the policy of the Icelandic government about jobs without location, specific location. What has made it very easy for us at the Environment Agency to uphold this policy and develop it is that we already have 9 locations to offer, and we are looking for even more. So we follow the applicant with a job. Do you want to work in Akureyri or Patreksfjörður in the Westfjords? It's up to you. There are also challenges, of course, related to this. You have to connect the people together in the workforce in all those locations, and you have to have sufficient infrastructure, and you keep everybody together, keep them happy, and I think you need management training, of course. This has led to that our office in Akureyri in the north has now 4 times the employment of employees, which we had 20 years ago. So it's been terrific. The Environment Agency was united from 3 previous agencies, and there were 3 employees. I have to warn you, we are very few in Iceland. 370,000 people. And we just said, you can work at any project in Akureyri. Feel free. So this is just wonderful, I think.
Well, fantastic. It's great to hear that example of flexibility. Mia Elstrand, you're the project leader of the North Sweden Green Deal. What can you learn from Iceland's approach? I mean, I suppose it's almost fine for kind of more administrative roles, perhaps, or roles whereby you might have to travel around a country anyway. But when you're looking at green projects, I suppose it would be harder to implement. Or do you think there would be flexibility for that kind of initiative to work in Sweden?
Well, first of all, thank you for having North Sweden here on this panel and here today. This is a part of the European Green Deal, and we're looking to all these different areas, the energy, the infrastructure, the skill supplies, the competence. So there are many big areas, and I think all of these areas requires that we work together and that we learn from each other and we help each other. And I think this is an example that probably will work really good. If it works in Iceland, probably the whole concept, or parts of the concept, will work in Sweden as well. Within this project, was quite glad to hear it earlier when Prime Minister and Tom talked about this lifestyle migrants, because that is what we're trying in this project, some of the parts. We're actually out in all 14 municipalities in northern Sweden and trying to strengthen the capacity in the municipalities so they can be better at welcoming new people. Doing in each municipality a gap analysis to see, is there any information in English, for instance? What happens if an electrician calls at 3 o'clock on a Thursday? Who will pick up from a number abroad? Questions like that. So we're actually doing this, and we started it out.
Have you had to take risks and try out lots of different ideas in doing so, just to almost try everything possible to make it happen?
We do, and I think also this green transition and all the opportunities that we have in Sweden, we have huge investments. We're talking about need to be 100,000 more people. That the climate effect of this green transition is reducing the carbon dioxide by 10%. That's huge numbers. And I think we have to try new ways. We can't do what's already been done. There's no really blueprints to do, and we have to be a bit brave, and we have to find new alliances and new friends, and we have to try things, and we have to meet like this, and we have to tell each other, we tried this and this works, and try it you too, and stuff like that.
Are you already having success in what you're doing? Your numbers, slowly mounting out. Do you still have big gaps?
Yeah, and I have many examples what we do because it's a really large project. But for instance, if you keep on talking about this lifestyle, here where there are many different organizations that we work with within the company. Here we're teaming up with the hospitality organization because they have a history of knowing how to welcome visitors. But this time we're not asking them to visit. We ask them to come and stay and settle down. So they've left digital traces. So we know that they are interested in the area. So by that we're using big data and AI to reach out to them. And we only just tried it out in a small scale, but so far it's looking good, and I'm looking forward to go back and tell you more about it. Yeah.
Fantastic. It's great to hear, so much effort in so many ways that you're almost kind of firing out there to do everything you can. But it's risk-taking, isn't it? And let me bring in Angus now, because you have to take risks and you have to fail sometimes. I mean, have you had failures that you've tried things but it just simply hasn't worked in the way that you thought?
Yeah, this is when all the elected politicians in the room start sweating. Because we have to make decisions about things that we think might bring short-term benefits, some things that might be more medium terms, and some things that will be much more long-term, but it'll take a while for you to see the benefits of that. So you have to have a mixture of all of these things. So at the moment, one of the things we're trying to do is to develop through our national planning framework, so the consent to build, the consent to develop, is what we're calling 20-minute neighbourhoods, which is to try and make sure that we have right across the country, obviously it'll be more difficult in rural areas, to make sure that people have public services and they have shops and they have the facilities that they require within a shorter travelling distance. So we are hoping that that is going to work. We've had other things where we've tried to provide inducements. We had one proposal for an island bond. We have a lot of islands in Scotland, not as many as Norway, but we still have quite a lot. And we wanted to work hard to try and support the existing population on these islands. And when we tested that out with people who lived on islands, so this goes back to the first session and the question, are you listening to people in communities? We did, and they said, actually, we'd rather not have that. We would rather have those financial means invested through other projects. So we listened to the communities and we didn't continue on that particular route. So yes, you have to try different types of policy approaches. But what's growing ever clearer to me, and especially listening to colleagues here as well, is there are no simple solutions to the challenge that we are discussing here. This is going to be a never-ending challenge just because of the circumstances we're describing. But what we are going to have to do is being constantly innovative to try and find ways to make sure people can live the most fulfilling lives where they have grown up in these challenging circumstances and make them easier, and at the same time help people who do not know these places get to know them better. So one example of that recently that we facilitated in Scotland was where local municipalities got together to showcase their particular part of the world to Ukrainians. To families who'd come, what did they know about Scotland? Well, not very much. And if they knew something, it was maybe Edinburgh or maybe Glasgow. But they might not know all the other fantastic parts of the country as well. So one of the things that we're doing, so that's working now and it is working. One of the things that we're about to embark on is a talent and migration service set up by the Scottish Government, which will be for people who want to move to Scotland, or for people who live in Scotland but are open to living and working elsewhere. So we can almost help people better understand where are their opportunities, what is the quality of life in these different places, and hopefully that will help people who want to move do that, and at the same time do everything that needs to be done to help people who already live in these communities stay, if that's what they want to do, by adopting flexible working practices, civil service job dispersal. Scottish Government in the past has moved jobs outside the main centres to more peripheral places.
So you
as
have
well.
to be an ad agency, you've got to be a tour operator, you've got to be wear so many hats, haven't you? Let me bring you back in, Lisa, because of course kind of financial incentives do work in some parts of the world. I know in some parts of Alaska it's been very successful to persuade people to come. But for example, the infrastructure is also needed if you want to really encourage remote working. And so that is still an ongoing challenge, I imagine.
You have to have the infrastructure. And as I was listening to both comments coming out of Sweden and out of Iceland, the reality is you've got to have good broadband. You've got to have the ability to connect, and in many parts of Alaska, we're not even on the map there, and so that's basic infrastructure. You asked a fair question about, are there failures that you learn from? And I think that's the important piece of it, because there's always failures, but what do you do with that failure? And as I was listening to Angus there, I'm thinking to myself, some of the failures, I think, in my state, in the U.S. Arctic, have been when we have failed to really work with and consult the indigenous people, consult the people who are there. Because I think sometimes we have a tendency to think, it's far away, it's small population, they don't have the capacity, and they're not given the benefit of the doubt for being able to really have ownership in that project and do it themselves. And so, for instance, back some years ago, what was happening was energy systems were being put in place, water treatment facilities were being put in place. It was funding coming into the village. A water treatment facility was erected. It's given to the community with no buy-in, no ownership, no training to the local people. So you didn't have anybody in the village who was trained as your maintenance operator. And so what happens? You have a problem and the whole thing fails and it doesn't work. Or if your idea from those on the outside is something bigger than the community can take on, you didn't then have the capacity to maintain it afterwards. An example was we built a water system in a smaller village, and it was what would work in a bigger village. We built it, and nobody could afford to literally hook up. And so we were trying to take these communities off what we call honey buckets, which is basically the bucket in the corner which you use for the facilities, and we gave them flush toilets, but nobody could afford to pay for the utilities because the consultation had not been what we had done. So what have we done? We've been working to divine these systems that are perhaps not as big and not the full flush toilet, but a standalone, pretty innovative system built in conjunction with our local agencies, Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and we've been working to build solutions that work for these remote areas where it is higher cost, and we're working to build the capacity and to get that buy-in so that it works for them. Because if we don't do that, that's where our failures are. And I'm hoping that we have really come to learn from that. Some of the energy projects, some of the mining projects that we have, the ones that are successful are where there has been direct engagement with the native people in that region to work with them, to allow for jobs and training opportunities and the benefits to flow to them instead of that very kind of paternalistic, colonial type of approach that we had been subjected to for centuries, whether it was people coming in from the outside, gold mining or going after furs, timber. The history has been there. And so it's about ownership by the people that really allows for the success.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because the standard for one, it's just not the same for another community. So many different needs. Sigrun, what have you learned about during this process of enabling people to work in these hubs? What have you learned to make it a success? What are the ingredients really that other communities might need? But I suppose all of those communities are different. How have you kind of consulted on the ground?
Well, we have communications with communities all over the year, connect with mayors and so on what's the best solutions. We need this infrastructure, of course. We rely on that a lot. And we have now a mapping of over 100 facilities all around the country where we can get a contract of lease of a facility if we want it. And the Ministry of Environment, Energy and Climate has also mapped all the facilities of the agencies in that ministry. And to work in a cluster, if you're the only worker, to work in a cluster with another firm and an agency, that's really helpful. And I think you always have to have this support from the management and from the support system, the human resources and so on. So, and the attitude, of course, that this is a positive opportunity.
Thank you. Let me bring in Larry again, because Larry, you were talking a little bit about, the opportunities that you've had. But what do you think are the bottlenecks to prevent more people from having your opportunities and to prevent a brain drain in a way? I imagine you've met a lot of students here in Tromsø, maybe staying, maybe going. What would make them stay?
Yeah, thank you very much. I feel that it is more easier, from what I've observed, to keep people who have been able to travel here and study to stay than attract fresh minds to the Arctic. And we have seen this constantly over the years. One of the things that we need to work on is immigration issues, no doubt. Mostly we're likely to stay in our bubble and think that all of us are within the EU area or the EEA area, right? And so there are people that we describe as coming from the third countries, which include Brazil, which includes Ghana, even Canada, even Canada. And so all of these people go through different immigration procedures. For example, I've been living here now. I have the possibility to bring in my family. It could take up to 11 months to get a visa granted to my partner to join me here in Norway. So these are some bureaucratic parts that we need to really look at. The other part has been on education, as I said earlier. It's a bit saddening to see that Norway is going to that path, because the lot of opportunities in the Arctic, which I believe sometimes we're not telling the story enough, right? During the Emerging Leaders, I heard stories of young people doing amazing things, and I feel that we could attract more people living down south when they know or have a glimpse of our lives in the Arctic. So probably I'm going to challenge the Arctic Mayors Forum to take this up, make a lot of documentary about the lives of young people in the Arctic. It's not all rosary with infrastructure, as has noted. But here in Tromsø, we note some kind of good vibes, as we like to call it in young people's words. We've had international airport, and now it's possible to travel directly from Tromsø to London or to Helsinki. So some of these things have to be marketed out there so that young people could have the possibility to know, yes, if I'm in Tromsø, I could still take a weekend out and still be able to afford cheap flight out of Tromsø to London or Helsinki or Frankfurt, right? So this is something that we need to do. On the educational stuff that I was talking to you about, Susanna, it is interesting to note that when international students come here during their master's student, they contribute to a lot in terms of the tourism industry. And if we successfully, I do not hope that we have that, that would cut off a lot of vibrant industry in the Arctic. That is one. And secondly, if we introduce these tuition fees, a lot of young people would like to look elsewhere. In the United Kingdom, we have a visa policy that attracts students who have been to the top 50 universities. Why would I then come to Norway to go through all of this and pay more fees instead of going to one of these high universities and have the opportunity to migrate to UK or to come to the Arctic? So we need to look at this issue holistically and ensure that we represent the Arctic in a way that we can have different talents, not only those in the EU or EEA, but outside the third countries as well.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. It's a really interesting perspective, and certainly it does widen what we need to think about. We've got a couple of minutes left. I just actually wanted to put that point over to Mia have you encountered any immigration issues? You may have found the talent that you need to fulfill certain positions, but are there immigration bottlenecks?
Yes, there are. For instance, if you need education, that's in Sweden you get it through the municipality, and you're not written in the municipality. There are some difficulties to doing it from abroad because you're not allowed to stay long enough in the country. Bottlenecks like this is that we're looking into them within the project. And I think also we talk, you have to be brave and you have to do force. It's an important thing that we not only tell each other the good stuff, also the difficulties and how we overcome them, and so we don't all have to do the same thing.
Absolutely. What would you say the biggest difficulty, Lisa, that you've overcome is? Is it the grid that you were telling me about earlier, or is it that kind of understanding of different community needs?
It really does encompass so much, and I think probably our greatest challenge right now is just the high cost of living there. And when your economies are very small, if you're in a village that is still relatively a subsistence economy, you don't have much coming in, and the price of home heating fuel to keep your home warm, to fill up your four-wheelers so you can go out hunting, or your boat to go out fishing just for your subsistence. If it's just continuing to be that much more expensive as it has been, it does push populations out. And so what we are seeing is we're seeing people leave the village, come to the hub community or into the larger cities in Anchorage, and they don't have the skills, they don't have the connections, they end up, many of them in a very destitute way, as homeless, with no means to get back to their village. So it's a challenge, the high cost, and this is where we all need to be working together to address innovative solutions that bring down just the reality of living in the far north.
Absolutely. Sorry.
So can I just jump off? So we're hearing a lot about the challenges, and quite rightly so, but maybe just as a final thought, quite apart from what do we have in common, well, we all live in the north, what is the other thing that we have in common? We all come from parts of the world that are uniquely, say it again, uniquely placed to make the most of the energy transition. We can utterly transform communities of all sizes and our national economies if we choose to do that. Norway and Scotland were very lucky in the 1960s to win in the natural lottery once. We were almost unique in the world to have won on the natural resource lottery twice. So we have to make the most of it, as do all of us, and I'm sure that will have a huge transitional impact in all of our communities, and we must make that work, especially in our more population-challenged and remote communities. And I think that is a tremendously good news thought to finish off our discussion. The future is bright, notwithstanding the serious challenges.
Absolutely. I have just got one question before we go to put to Mia. Mia, how do you cooperate with Indigenous people, the Samis, in Norrbotten? And that's from Vida Anderson. What kind of cooperation have you had in terms of recruitment with the Samis, or even recruitment, but even with regards to the green projects that you're recruiting for, and cooperation about those, the entire concept?
That's a tricky question to ask in 20 seconds.
Yeah,
but
I'll give you a little bit longer.
Yeah, but there are in many different ways. For instance, this is a project funded by the ERDF, the Regional Development Fund from EU. The Samis today have a voice in there. They're written within the program, so they will be taken into account in a serious and a way that matter. And I think we see this in many different ways. And also, we've been talking about the windmill plants. We have Europe's largest windmill plant in northern Sweden, and they have a lot of ongoing discussions, working very close with the Samis. So there are many varieties of examples where it works really well, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know Sigrun would like to have the last word, so please, over to you.
Just looking into the future, I think the politicians, both at municipality level and state level, have to plan the educational system and the work opportunities combined and together. I mentioned Akureyri in the north before. They have aquaculture education at university level there. Bang, an opportunity for me, for a great specialist. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panel. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. So we're going to have to wrap up now. I know Andreas has got to get on the move again pretty quickly, but that was a really fascinating discussion, and I really look forward to welcoming you all to the big picture tomorrow when we're talking about energy and mixed solutions.
And I think the big take from that session was really like, do we tell the Arctic story correctly, or are we doing something wrong in telling the story, and are we reaching the right communities inside and outside the region? So I think we have to meet next year again.
Absolutely. Cooperation and understanding. So Andreas, thank you. You can get on the move.
Don't forget, Northern Norway on the plate. The minister is cooking. So see you here in half an hour.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Climate change in the Arctic is a significant new era of resilience we may not have seen before. But this is an opportunity to create agency in the Arctic with solutions such as precipitation mitigation. This also allows other countries and regions to learn from us in this initiative of ownership.
My vision for the Arctic region is one where scientists, local land users, and indigenous governments cooperate and communicate more effectively to increase scientific impact and promote sustainable development.
I think the future opportunities in the Arctic are embedded in indispensable knowledge of how to cultivate a resilient, multi-species habitat.
I think the future opportunities for the Arctic include investment in key physical and digital infrastructure in order to integrate the Arctic with the global economy, and also international collaborative science that enhances cooperation, incorporates local knowledge, and that can be used in decision-making.
I think the future opportunities in the Arctic can offer economic benefits that can be good for both locals and external parties, but it's crucial to ensure that development is sustainable and fair. Regional cooperation is key to realizing these opportunities.
I think the future opportunities in the Arctic will be found in the development of sustainable farming and food security. For this to be a success for people both inside and outside of the Arctic region, I believe that learning traditional ecological knowledges from indigenous communities is essential.
And back we are. Last big picture of today, last Break TV session of today. I'm now joined by 3 people, so more to discuss, and I hope we find some proper solutions on the questions inside. I will start with Bente Haug, who is the Vice Rector of the University of Tromsø here in Tromsø. Then we'll move over to Jani Djokic, who is an emerging leader, and then Stein Vidar Løfters, who is the Head of Communication at SpareBank 1 Norge. Welcome, thank you all for joining. Bente, we heard in there about that we need to communicate the Arctic story maybe differently, that there are challenges, the investments that's there, and people come here, not enough, but do we communicate the story in a wrong way? Do not enough people know about the opportunities up here, or is there something we do wrong in the way we communicate the Arctic as a region to be?
Well, what we can see and learn from the past 10 or 15 years is that when it's communicating or good communication on the possibilities in the northern part of Norway, people will have a positive view and the interest will increase. But the way it's been communicating about the crisis in demography, energy, a lot of trouble, and not at least the situation connected to the geopolitical and security issues, boarding or as a border, being a boarding country towards Russia, of course this together brings a massively depressing view of Northern Norway. But we know we can change this if we are good at communicating a positive narrative, because there, as we heard today in the panel, there are a lot of opportunities, but we have to be able to communicate that in a much better way.
What is the role of universities then to communicate that narrative? You know?
Well, we do that all the time because we are, through the way we recruit students, the way we recruit researchers and lecturers, we're talking about all the advantages that lies in being in the Arctic, because this is where the opportunities are for really being inventive, really learning about the new thing, really be a big part of the green transition, the energy transition, all the major things that are going on. So I think we do that, but we are not center stage on the political arena, and not in necessarily as commentators too, but maybe we should be more visual and visible through media on what we are good at up here.
That's a good issue, because Janni, you are new to the Arctic. Tell us a bit, like, how do you end up in the Arctic? How did you become an emerging leader and came here to Norway and Northern Norway?
Well, my journey in the Arctic actually started in Tromsø. Okay. So I was a student at UiT in 2012, and I guess I wanted to live somewhere just as beautiful, but didn't want to deal with immigration issues anymore. And so I found myself in the Yukon, Canada, and I reside in two places, so on the shared traditional territories of the Kwanlin-Dun First Nation and the Ta'an-Quachan peoples. And then in my day job, I reside and thrive in the traditional territory of the First Nation of Nacho-Nyak-Dun. And that really is what took me to the north of Canada. It's that I wanted to live in an Indigenous community, and not just where, you know, development was going on and Indigenous peoples were just there, but I wanted to live in a place where Indigenous peoples were leading. And definitely for me, coming from a background in the East, I saw more similarities between the cultural identity and mentality and the importance that we put on community and traditional knowledge and living as one with the land and one with our elements, I felt more closely aligned to the culture of Northern Canada and in Indigenous communities in Canada, and wanted to really find a place that felt like home on a human level.
Did you find home?
Yes.
What was the biggest surprise? Finding home.
I don't know what the biggest surprise was. I think
back in Tromsø, maybe. No?
Oh, I don't think I will. I think I'll stay in the Yukon forever.
Right,
yeah.
Stavnida, one of the statements I was really triggered by was like that the energy transition is the industry to be in at the moment, you know. From a financial perspective, how do you see that here in North Norway? Do you feel that as well, you know? Like, how's the mood to invest into local energy transition businesses from a financial perspective, from your industry in a way?
Yeah, that's a large question, and I think it pretty much comes down to how our government will support those who want to invest. And we have an ongoing tax discussion at this moment, which is not leading us in the right direction. And in fact, if we don't take the energy issue seriously, we will have a lack of electric energy within maybe 3 years or so. So there is an opportunity, but we have to grasp it. And I don't think we do at this moment in time.
How do we do it?
You are asking large questions here. One problem is, for instance, where can we build? Then we are in the middle of, the indigenous issue again, the right to land and so on. And we have just signed a treaty saying that we will let 30% of the land in the north and the sea as well stay untouched. So if we want to build windmills, we have to know where we can build it, and then we have to have a tax system which will attract investors. So we have some steps to go, and we are short on time.
It's funny because like yesterday we heard a lot about who is the owner of a problem, and today we heard a lot about like we communicated wrongly. So
do you as an industry communicate wrongly to the policymakers, or like you mentioned with media? Like, how can that be, like, how can we move on, you know?
Yeah, I don't think we communicate wrongly. I think actually we communicate quite good, because we have been aware of the problem for so many years. But we have been asking the young people, why do you want to move away from the north, and what do you need to stay? And we have the answers. And to the politicians, we have told you the answers. You have to stop telling us about what we should do and start doing stuff. And we are not there, not at all.
If I may comment?
Yes.
What we see from the university is that between 70 and 80% of those who are students at UIT, they stay in the region. And that's really important. So the university is sort of the gate and the gate opener to stay in the Arctic.
If I may, just because one of my colleagues earlier in her talk, she brought up youth washing. And I think so often we're bringing youth into these spaces, and I think we're almost intended to be a fly on the wall or innocent bystanders, as opposed to being in decision-making discussions or discussions that lead to tangible outcomes. And I mean, even just here today, yes, referred to as an emerging leader, but I don't think anyone here knows that I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Yukon's largest Indigenous investment corporation. And so youth are moving up very quickly and vertically through the ranks in our organizations, and we're going to see those from the baby boom quickly move out of positions. And I don't think we're doing a very good job of bringing youth into spaces where we can lead to tangible outcomes. And, you know, I think it's unfortunate that just with the sessions that happened, you know, we had our colleague Larry as one of the emerging leaders, and, you know, I think he should have been on the stage with the Prime Minister of Norway to talk about these issues and putting us directly in front of those that are decision makers.
So it is a matter of communication.
Yes, but I think it's a matter of two-way knowledge sharing. And so often, I mean, I work a lot with youth, and I'm a youth myself, and I always advocate for adults just need to get out of the way. If we create the safe spaces for youth to have leadership voices and be part of the solutions, they can do amazing things.
It's a fantastic comment here. Unfortunately, I have to stop it because we have to prepare the main room for the Northern Norway and the Plate event, and they need the technicians here. But thank you very much for these short comments. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, and I see you tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of the evening.